It's like we almost like we planned it this way.
It's fantastic.
Sometimes we do. I don't know. People will be
Today,
surprised. They're like, wait a minute, you don't ever start till 10:30. What are you doing at 10
well,
o'clock?
some of us have dates.
Mandates.
Mm-hmm.
The children did not, they didn't get that joke. I was like, like when your dad goes out with his friends for a drink.
Yeah.
You're like, what?
Play date, mandate.
I know.
No?
I know.
Right.
Nope. I got nowhere. Nope. I got nothing.
Sometimes you got to drop those dad jokes in just to keep the kids on.
Oh, I know. Well, the lame dad
remind
jokes.
them.
What can you say? Pastor jokes are, I think they're worst. Worst, yes. Worst, like
What are
sausage.
worst? Brat?
Bratwurst. Oh, man. We're not going to do any kind of lead-in talk. We're just going to start.
Well, I can read the preface, and then as people come into the live stream, they'll jump in, and then we can
Do we want to play the
fast
music,
forward.
though?
But yeah, go for
just
it.
to
I'm already
get going?
recording, so we're all good to go. Yeah.
Oh, all right. Hey, there's Melody. We got one.
I've been
All right.
so busy this week. I barely had time to even think. So I don't
Yeah.
have a lot
Well,
of
if you have to play
prep.
chauffeur on top of all your other jobs.
So many hospitals, so many clinics.
Oh, that's a little quiet. There we go. Where's the button to turn it up? There it is.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. This is the Band of Books podcast, episode number 350, and today we're gonna cook with a little oregano, a little thyme, maybe a little basil. Basil the Great, the Anglo-Saxon tamarind. Well, we were doing dad jokes, so I had to throw that one out.
Oh, yeah, I know. I see. I didn't get it until you. I was like, what? What did we transition to a
Basil.
YouTube cooking
Basil?
show all
Basil.
of a sudden?
Yeah.
Basil the Great. Yes.
And as always, we are your hosts, Christopher Gillespie.
Christopher, chilling and well and maxing and relaxing in the
No,
morning.
I say
yes.
it. You don't say it about yourself.
I know. I understand.
That would be weird. Talk about yourself in the third person for an entire episode.
I've been known to do that. Yes. It's
We
the
should
ego
do
and
that.
the id and the
That would
super
be-
ego.
That would be an April Fool's episode. So, talk in the third person from both
I was
sides
talking to
of the-
Pastor Gillespie the other day, and
That's right.
and he said to me,
Yeah, that's right. Well, people give me a hard time. They're like, "You're always quoting your professors." I'm like, "Well, I could quote myself, but that would be weird."
well, sometimes you quote your professors, but they are yourself. It's like,
That's true. There's that too. I'm
There's
an
that mixed up.
autodidact.
did we say Basil the Great? Yes, Saint Basil the Great.
Basil of
One of
Caesarea.
the Cappadocian fathers, but also the doctors of the church, right? He's included in that
Yeah.
list. The great doctors of the church, recognized by both West and East as
Right.
As a father. So
And yet not often read anymore,
yeah, well,
which is
maybe
why we're reading him.
there's something about the Cappadocians, because they're not Antiochian, right? And they're not Alexandrian. They're
Yes.
they're just a little bit different.
Yeah. Andrew.
Yeah, it's not. They're not highly typological like the
No.
Antiochians, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
the Alexandrian. So I don't know what it is. Is it the things that they're concerned about are not as we don't think are as relevant, or
I think that I was reading, I showed it to you yesterday, that, for example, Basil and Gregory, they loved Ephraim the Syrian, who is a
Okay.
desert father and considered Eastern because he's Syrian.
sure?
And yet in the West then, Ephraim's not really well known, even though, like I said, he's written over 300,000 lines of poetry and hymnody. But the early fathers really liked him a lot, and Epaphatus, another desert father, and Maximus
Sure.
the Confessor. And yet, because of that, then, when you get to Basil or the two Gregories, Nis and Nazianzus, like you said, they're accepted by both East and West, which means they don't really find a home either place. And so therefore, I think that's the problem, is that we want to categorize and put everything in its proper place. So you can say of Augustine, well, Augustine's a Western church father, and, the East has plenty of problems with Augustine. And then you go to the East and you Eastern church fathers or the desert fathers who are more accepted by the Eastern churches. So the Western church doesn't really appreciate them. And then the Nicene guys, the Cappadocians in particular, yeah, we were talking era that when I was at seminary and reading these, we read Basil on the Holy Spirit because it was all
Right.
about the Trinitarian controversies.
Well, that's where I
And
was going to go.
yeah,
I think that's the answer. Is that
yeah,
the controversies and the things that they're writing against or trying to confess rightly,
yeah,
they're largely canonized with the Council of
yeah,
Nicaea and Constantinople. So,
sure.
I mean, and those are universal confessions of the church. So,
Hmm.
like, okay, well, now do we need to go back and read one of the guys that actually worked through a lot of these problems in the midst of
Right.
Arianism and other kind of conflict,
Yeah. Hmm.
or actually the spirit conflicts would be who are some of those the
Montanus,
pneumaticians, Montanus,
Apollinarius. Oh,
Apollinarians, yeah. Yeah, I mean, if the resolution was made universally, with the councils, then
right.
why
What's
read
the,
the
yeah,
guys that worked through it? I guess
yeah.
maybe that's it. You were saying at the
Well,
seminary.
and
I'm sorry, I interrupted.
no, no, I was saying that you focus on the Christological controversies, the Trinitarian controversies, you focus on argumentation,
Mm-hmm.
which, especially at seminary, it's not really engaging because in the book that we're going to read from today, Alf's compilation of these things, which he gets from the Bede, the last part is a letter that Basil writes to a colleague, and it's kind of like, here's the Christian life in a nutshell. And he talks about love and prayer, he talks about spiritual warfare. We don't read
Mm-hmm.
that stuff, which
No.
at the seminary, as a potential pastor, that'd be the kind of thing that I would really benefit from. And then bring it, it's like, right, like there's certain bands that you want to introduce your friends to, but you know that there's, like Radiohead's a good example, right? Like if you want to
Yes.
introduce your friends to Radiohead, there's certain Radiohead albums you avoid because it's
Right.
just not an entry point, or even King Crimson, right? Like
That
here's
was the one I
Century
tried to do to my
Southern,
children yesterday. Yeah, they were like, "We're not schizophrenic." I'm like, "Do you know what that means?" And they're like, "No." I said, "You're
right?
schizoid." And they're like, "What are you talking about?" And I'm like, and then I had to play it for him. And
Hmm.
Anne's like, "Can you shut it off, please?" I'm like, "But can we listen to the whole
This
song?
is
It's
the
only
entry
7 minutes."
point. This
This
is the
is the
bridge.
entry point. This is
Yes,
the entry
yes,
point. Yes, with
yes.
Greg Lake and whoever was
Hmm.
singing, and yeah, the whole deal.
And it's the same thing, I think, anyways, with the early church, because one, their world is alien to us by and large.
Hmm.
Because I was talking the other day with someone that, especially in the Protestant West, history kind of starts and stops with the Saxon Reformation, Luther and the Germans, and then
Yeah.
moves forward from there through the Calvinist Reformed Reformations, the English Reformation, and so on. But we tend to fly over the Middle Ages, except to criticize it. Maybe read Thomas, for example.
Yeah.
Definitely read the early medieval church at all, which is why I'm just playing in it. It's fantastic.
It's basically anywhere
And
from like John of Damascus to like 8th century, and then
yeah,
we jump to Luther with
yes,
maybe a few medieval
right.
guys. Who's been another? Anselm would be one in the middle there,
Sure,
right?
Anselm,
He's
Abelard. Yeah,
an
that. But
Abelard.
that again it was a debate. Anselm and Abelard, a debate on original sin and forgiveness and
Oh, I see
how
what you're
that works.
saying. Not devotional writings or
Right. We tend to focus on arguments, and perhaps that's why we find in certain church bodies a kind of argumentative collegiality rather than a kind of pastoral
perhaps
collegiality.
this is like the constant debates about like which lectionary you use, and it's like, why does this keep
Well, just
happening?
debate.
Well,
Yes, we have to argue. It's like, yeah, but
because
look
we
at the
have to
stuff you
argue,
read. Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Look at what you were fed, though. You were fed debates and arguments. And it's like I wrote the
Mm.
other day, you have to be very careful what you allow in your ears because you're giving access to your soul. So what
Yeah.
you listen to will enter into your soul and it will either enrich or it will degrade you. And you and I know this as musicians, of course, but same thing with theology. If you
Sure.
read negative theology constantly, arguments constantly, you start to develop an eye for, hey, where's the heresy hiding? Where's the argument hiding?
Well, I mean,
Versus,
arguably, I mean, in the
ye-
evolution of this podcast, this is why we stopped reading negative things that we were going to be highly critical
mhm,
of. I
yeah,
mean, it isn't to say we don't have criticisms, but we're
mhm,
not reading things that aren't commendable in some way, you
yeah,
know?
right, right.
Well,
Because
and
in
it's
the
also
end,
like you're just going around tearing people down too, which isn't really helpful and the benefit of the church, beneficial
I'll
to the
say
church.
that it's a great way to build a brand and sell merchandise. Outrage culture,
Okay. Sure.
right?
Okay.
It's called hit marketing. Movie studios do this. They know that by editing trailer a certain way, people will hate watch the trailer, which will drive views and give investors a false interpretation of the potential earning of a movie, for example.
And then they can raise the funding and da da da. I
Right.
gotcha. Okay.
And on YouTube, obviously, being a negative reactor is going to gain you more views than being a positive reactor. It's like I tell
Except
people,
they got rid of the thumbs
can't
down. You don't even get to thumbs down anymore. Well, I mean, you
exactly.
don't get to see how many thumbs down, I should
You
say.
get ratioed instead.
Yeah.
But you can't be a meteorologist in San Diego because every day is the same and it's beautiful, right?
We could
That's why
change
they
the
have
colors on the
supermodels,
map. It's like we
right?
raise 5
But it's
degrees.
like
That's
no,
red.
we got to find the latest beauty contestant winner because no one's watching the weather. That's not the focus, right?
You can import it from
And
Mexico, right?
yeah, well, that's what they do, and it's the same thing in the church, unfortunately, because human nature is what it is, which is we are drawn towards the negative because it's scandalous, and we love a good car crash.
Mm.
And it's also difficult to it's difficult to cultivate contentment, compassion, long suffering, the fruits of the spirit, because they are long in coming. They demand patience.
And
Pointing at you and
I mean,
demanding you repent of your
you,
heresy, that's more convenient.
you can't find those inside. That's the other problem. It's like you can't
Yeah.
generate them. They're not auto-generating.
R-
They're not, they're
Right.
contrary to sinful human nature. So
Right.
they have to be
Well,
given.
I wrote something about this on social media this morning. I posted it in Telegram.
I saw that.
Just a little missive, and that was from my reflection this morning that I am at a point in my career, in my life, where I much prefer talking to clergy from outside my church body because the
Mm.
conversations are more challenging, more evocative, and
I was just going to say
what's the word?
interesting.
Mellower.
Really?
Because we both know, well, they are because, like, I have a friend who's a Roman Catholic, and we know where we disagree, right? But I've been feeding him Ephraim the Syrian and Maximus, and I've been feeding him early medieval guys, and they're all Roman Catholic. They're all Catholic, right? Like,
Yeah.
Ephraim the Syrian's a Catholic. He doesn't know a world of denominations. He's Catholic.
Right.
And therefore, here's your criteria for being a Catholic. You're either a Christian or you're not. And even in the early Middle Ages, the debate was between Vatican Roman Catholics and the Roman Catholics up the edge of the frontier in Britain and Wales and Ireland and so on, right? So it's still a very kind of tightly construed debate because it's really about Catholicity versus and so you see then, I can appreciate why these guys became missionaries and like fled to the edge of the Roman Empire, for example, to get away from these debates. And Ephraim does it too by going to Syria and avoiding becoming a bishop. And in present tense, that's inescapable. And I think it's actually a symptom of the degradation and the winnowing of our church in the United States. I think God is winnowing the churches, and these debates that are not reading the Catholicity, for example, to draw it back to the topic, we're not debating the creeds in our church body.
No. We are debating creation, though.
We are. We talked about this, is that
Yeah.
we've assumed the modernist reality and then categorized everything into creation, redemption, sanctification. And therefore, wherever the Son is, the Father is not. And wherever the Holy Spirit is, the Son may be there if he's speaking, but he's not there if he's not speaking. And as a consequence, we divide God into three individuated persons and commit a Trinitarian
Right.
heresy, right? So maybe, like we've been noting, there are others who have said we're not in a post-Christian era, we're pre-Christian era. And therefore, it may behoove us to go back to the weird and the wild days of Basil and the Gregories and the Desert Fathers and others.
Yeah.
Because who are they talking to? Well, they're talking to pagans,
Well, and I
Romans,
realized this.
Persians, so
We
on.
we were looking at the end of Second Timothy. There's this strange song from Paul there. It's formatted that way in New King James. And I think it's right. It's poetic anyway because it has two stanzas, and it's little children, young men, and older men. And you're like,
Yeah,
wait
right.
a minute, but what about women and what about girls? And it's and then you also think of the table of duties. You have other instructions specifically from Paul to husbands.
Right.
And you're like, so Paul is recognized. I mean, he's in it's a radically libertarian world, right? That
Mm-hmm.
he's in. The Romans aren't tightly controlling morality by any stretch. There's moral police or something. I mean, there are accepted norms and whatnot. They do have that.
Mm-hmm.
They have that shame culture. But in any case, I mean, Paul is he's not just presuming, but he's encouraging husbands, specifically men, right? And he has and young men is a separate kind of vocational category for Paul. And you're like, well, wait a minute. Like, I thought we were egalitarian, like everybody is equal before God.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's true. Egalitarian in that sense.
Yeah.
But as far as created order, the way that God had made people, and this is, of course, this is all very controversial because we're in the context of the new Title IX rules. You probably followed this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, well, we're going to rewrite the civil rights legislation to say instead of biological sex, it's going to be grammatical gender. And you're like,
Sure.
can you just do that? Well, that's an attack on creation, because you're saying now the words that God gives don't actually matter anymore, male and female.
It does show the limit. I actually had this conversation on a different subject with a pastor the other day. It shows the limitations of the historical grammatical. It has a tendency to flatten reality, right?
Yeah,
because
perhaps.
you're not asking the metaphysical. You're just simply saying, well, grammatically, what does this mean?
Oh, I
Which
see what you're
I
saying.
love you.
Yeah.
I'm definitely a big word nerd, and
Grammar
well-cleft
matters.
Words,
Right?
yeah, grammar matters. Words have meaning, but that's the problem: is that grammar, divorced from meaning, is flat, and then because
Then you just play
grammar,
word
language,
games, right? That's the
language
postmodern
is
move,
dynamic.
right?
We know this.
Yeah.
And so divorced from meaning, divorced from higher truth, words can do anything.
Did
This is
God
a
really
modern
say?
experiment. Right.
Well,
Right.
or he did say that we get a knowledge of good and evil. You're like, oh yeah,
Right.
look at that. Do you really
This
want
is why
that?
Tolkien's offended by modern fairy tales, because as a philologist, you can't just change the meaning of these words to then rewrite fairy tales and myths.
If only
Right,
he
he's
knew
saying
where
that.
we would go.
Yeah, exactly.
If only.
If only he could see Rings of Power today. And
Gosh.
as a consequence, what we're doing is we're saying about reality, which is the earth and creation and all and therein. As I was reading in what's the Psalm for Sunday I was praying yesterday, 90, I think it is, yeah.
Oh, for this coming Sunday?
Where he says the waves praise praise the Lord. And
Oh, well, we had it last week with 147, where he said he had this. I mean, it's really, it seems like a throwaway phrase, and it really got me thinking about it this morning because I knew we talk cosmology here, as we do. What did he say? Oh, that gave the stars their names. And I'm like,
Their
well, what
names,
are those names? What are the names? Like, where?
Right.
But he knows everything by name, right? So
He knows
what it's
everything by name.
emphasizing.
Right.
So why could and it's in the context
and the stars
of
are also
like
angels. Yeah.
well, there's that too, right?
Yeah.
But that in the context of your distress, like he numbers the number of hairs on your head all the way up to the names of the angels of the whole angelic host, or even of the stars and planets, if you want to go there too.
Both, right?
And so he's not concerned about you. Of course, he's concerned about you, right? He's concerned about everything. And
Well, that's Jesus' point, right? Is that the flowers of the field, he
right.
dresses them.
the birds of the heavens,
It's like
they get
birds of the
their
heavens
food.
have their exactly.
Oh.
And I think this is why Paul Kingsnorth, I enjoy him for this, because he's a Christian who used to be an environmentalist, who's still an environmentalist, but within now the context of orthodoxy, Christian
right.
orthodoxy, and biblical orthodoxy. And he's saying, I actually found a home for my environmentalism because the environmental movement left him behind. Because modern environmentalism is we can buy our way out of this with technology. We can fix the earth and we can change climate if we just
Isn't that the height
spend enough
of
money.
hubris, isn't it?
It's just the height of irony. Like, do you not hear yourself talk? It's the opposite of conservation.
It's just a payola scheme. How can we support?
Of course it is. Right.
How can we create new
true.
industries and make more money?
And then we
it's
can
so
say
gross.
being beneficent and altruistic at the same time. It's perfect.
Just
While we
don't
strip
ask
mine
those
the
children
world.
in the cobalt mines, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And this is Paul's point in his conversations with people that I listen to, is that our interest in the earth and our interest in the world are twofold. One, we're interested in the earth because it's God's creation. We are part of his creation, and we are called to be good stewards of that creation. from our own bodies all the way down to and up to the largest and the smallest. But then in relation to the world, that's actually a second article, because Jesus died to redeem the cosmos, and the world's going to actually be burned away with fire, right? We made the world, it'll be burned away. The earth, on the other hand, will remain because that's what God made. And so as Christians, as stewards, we ask, well, how can we conserve earth? And as I wrote last week, that if you want to be a revolutionary as a Christian, go and take care of the earth and turn your back on the world. That'll really upset people. Go plant a tree, go feed the birds, go build a house for somebody, right? It's replenishment. Conservation is I use it and then I replace it. People used to understand this. You and I grew up this because we're children of the 70s. Raise a garden is a big middle finger to the WEF example, because you're going to raise your own crops, and they don't want you to do that. They want you to be, dependent upon monoculture.
It's an incredible farming. Well, and I understand why central planning makes sense, because of if your highest moral principle is efficiency,
yes,
and not livelihood and not well-being, but just efficiency.
The word efficiency is a nice word that actually is code for convenience, meaning we're not going to wait. Okay. It's pride. It's saying, I don't care if we have the wisdom or maturity to use this according to God's purpose. We're going to get it right now. It's eating the apple. It's saying we're not going to wait.
Yeah.
It's the root of so much sin and evil.
Just imagine there's no future.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
We're not going to wait for the earth to produce its fruit. We're not going to wait for this child to mature into an adult. We're not going to wait for our body to heal itself. We're going to force it. Well, how? Efficiency. It's like, no, this isn't efficient. It's actually very inefficient when you look at it. 80% of the world suffers because of your efficiency.
Well, this is the constant experience of Israel's kings, that they go out to war before they've been authorized to, because they get impatient. Yeah.
Yes.
It's like, no, God, and don't worry about those enemies. God will take care of it. And you're like, wait,
and I think this is
but
the
I'm the king.
Benefit of right. Well, I think this is the benefit then of reading the early church fathers and reading early church stuff, is they're answering questions of creation in relation to others who have a cosmology that we no longer have. And also, they're not denatured yet. They're not de-wilded yet. And so their cosmology has a creation myth. It has an apocalyptic myth. It has a redemption myth. They have touch points with these other communities, these other people, to say, no, we share a lot in common. It's just that, it's actually all pointing to one thing, which is the head, which is Christ. This is Paul's point to Timothy, for example. Like, we don't deny there's fathers, there's husbands, there's elderly, there's young. We don't deny this. You and I,
male, female,
we share this in
all
common.
of that.
A neighbor,
Yeah.
We know this. We even share some of the same moral tenets. But when it comes to the big question of, well, but why? Why do we love? Why do we obey the law? Why do we hold to these vocations and callings, and so on and so forth? We differ on that.
I don't know. I think there is at root one principle.
Well, of course there is. I was trying not to get myself in trouble.
We don't want to die.
All truth is God's
We just don't want to die.
Well, that's
we just don't want. Yeah. So we don't take people's stuff because we don't want to die. We don't take their life because we don't want to die. We don't attack their family because we don't want to die. I mean,
right.
So I mean, and that's like what is that? The base. What do they call that? Like instinct, the base instinct, I guess. Self-preservation, right? At the root, right? So I don't know. I mean,
if you start from the premise that all truth is God's truth, as Augustine asserts, then the truth that you see in other people's beliefs is partial truth. It is actually true. Like, they are actually seeking Christ, but they just don't know Christ. They're looking for their way home. We see this all the time, by the way. The reason that people are never settled in life is because they're looking for a home. And the reason they can't find a home to settle down in, and they can't find a group of people to make a family with that is going to love them the way they need to be loved, is because the home they're looking for is a specific place. And the people they're looking for is a very specific group of people. And the person that they're looking for is a very specific person. So they're looking for the truth. It's just that every time they settle on, well, this is the truth. Like, living here and being a part of this is the truth. And then time goes by and it's unsatisfying. So then they move to the next thing, and then that thing becomes the truth. It's like you're looking for heaven. You're looking for Jesus.
Have you heard of this trend? I imagine you have. Sometimes they call it digital nomads, but it's
Yeah, yeah,
nomadic.
yeah,
So I
yeah.
have no home. I've been following people that, have
Hmm.
passports in multiple countries. They've established or
Yes.
multiple citizenships, or
Hmm.
if anything, they've
Yeah.
established like bank accounts in different countries, and
Hmm. Yeah, oh, yeah.
so that they move about. Some people
Yeah,
live
they're
on boats,
cosmopolitans.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and it's like, but that nomadic life
Hmm.
is um,
You
it's
know,
contrary to our.
pasturage. Hmm.
Yeah, well, it's always
Yeah,
looking for something, right? It's
right.
always greener pastures,
Preached on
and
this like 3 weeks ago.
you
I
don't
actually used this
find it.
exact example. Yeah. If you don't have a church, that was the topic, was the church,
Oh, you're a
the
nomad.
paragraph.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're a nomad. You're not a pilgrim. You're a nomad. And a pilgrim is a sheep taken out and taken out to
Okay.
pasturage.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
That's good.
once you eat all the grass around the fold, your shepherd takes you further afield. And finally, you're going up the mountains. You're a pilgrim. You're on a pilgrimage, and the pilgrimage is to find food pasturage. A nomad simply looks up at the sky and holds up his or her hands and says, my God, what now?" Because you have no
And
pasturage,
you
you have
just
no anchorage,
wander.
you have no.
You just wander.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And unfortunately, to quote Bono, you still haven't found what you're looking for.
He's
And
quoting a psalm, by the way. But okay.
yeah, I know, yeah. And that's the thing in our culture today with rampant consumerism and hyper-individualism, is that we don't want to subscribe to any hierarchy of authority. We don't want to subscribe to any one place because we don't want to be limited, because we're taught progress, openness, moving forward constantly, constant improvement, betterment. This is the
Mm.
ideal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And settling ordinary. I learned this in AA actually. To
Yeah.
to say that my life is ordinary is a curse. But when you come into recovery, you have to admit that the thing that drove one of the things that really drove my addiction was I couldn't live an ordinary life. In fact, my life was so
Novelty.
crazy.
Yeah.
Yes,
Novelty.
it was crazy. And you usually hit bottom as an addict when crazy becomes ordinary.
Mm.
This is the trap. Well, my life is
Chasing.
so
Yeah.
boring and
You're always
ordinary,
chasing.
so I'm
Yeah.
going to do this
Chasing.
thing, and then you get high, you get drunk, and it's wild. And then you hook up with people who are the same, and now it's even wilder. And then you go and do these things, and it's even wilder. But at a certain point, you run out of wild. There's no wild there. It's just ordinary. I get up and I do crazy things with crazy people, and then if I get to the end of the day, I go, "Wow, I can't believe I made it," and that becomes ordinary, and that's your bottom, because you
Yeah.
realize like I can't go
When
anywhere
you look
except
back and you're like, you thought it was wild at the time, but
yes,
it was very diminutive. It was like making
right,
you smaller. You weren't actually
right.
going
That's
out. You were
exactly.
driving
Oh, yeah,
in,
yeah,
actually.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 You're just circling the tree over and
Hmm.
over and over
It
again.
just looks
Right.
different each time around. Maybe.
Well, yeah, because you just inebriate yourself so that you don't see that you're not really going anywhere.
You're in a
You think you are.
you're stuck in a loop, a doom loop.
Yeah, it's a feedback loop. Yeah, it
Hmm.
becomes ordinary because at a certain point you become cognizant of the fact that I think I'm just doing the same thing every day, every day. It's like Shane Gillis, the comedian, said, being a heroin addict is every morning you get up and you go on quests. It's like playing D&D. It's large. What's our first side quest? Find copper. You got to find copper so I can turn the copper in so I can get money so I can buy heroin. Like, it's just so boringly average to be a drug addict. And people from the outside go, "That's crazy." But when you're on the inside of it, it's just life. That's just what you do. And and then you get sober and you look at it and go, "Man, that was crazy." Wait, no, that wasn't crazy. I was crazy. And you're like, "Yeah, it was crazy."
Hmm.
And you know what you were looking for? What? Ordinary. And that's a curse word. It's a curse word for an addict.
Yeah.
So, because ordinary is boring.
That's what I was gonna say.
And
That they're almost
23-year-old
synonymous.
me would be
Yeah.
so disgusted with 53-year-old me. Just like, "Really, dude? This is how we turn out?" I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Ugh. Where did
Well,
we
I
go
mean,
wrong?"
even in the last 10 years or whatever. I mean,
Oh, sure, absolutely.
yeah. It's not. You don't have to
And
go that far back.
no. But
It's
everybody,
not
I
just
think,
age and wisdom. I mean, I think that's part of it, though. But our maturity that comes from time, right? Just from being put through the ringer enough
well, I
times.
think having the Lord Jesus Christ beat the living hell out of me constantly
Okay, you could
helps a
put it
lot
that way.
too.
That's what I was going to say. Right.
Again, we can do this the hard way or the harder way. And Jesus is like, "I know, don't, yeah, I know you're going to say harder. So let me just
Yeah, and
cripple you."
and you mock kind of like, not mock, but can't understand, the Pilgrim Progress, and we didn't,
Mhm.
we did a lot of time in the
Yeah.
Bunyan work, but that
Mhm.
picture, I mean, you
Mhm.
can't really see the pilgrimage until you look backwards on it, right?
I read
Until
that
you've
this
actually
morning.
been
I
on
can't
it.
remember. A philosopher wrote that we move
Look at me, I'm a
forward by constantly
philosopher.
looking. Well, we move forward by looking backwards. Like
Hmm.
our entire future is determined by our past. It's a paradox.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
posted about this yesterday. I came out of that doctor's office with my son, looked
good.
out the window, and it hit me right that moment. I've been looking out this exact window for 21 years, and you realize like, oh, but yay, but.
Yeah,
And then we did our pilgrimage. We went and had breakfast
I'm gonna
where we
say,
always
oh, the
have after,
places we've gone, right?
right.
Hmm.
And you realize like, okay, have I really gone anywhere in the past 21 years then? And then I go back even further and you're like, actually, I've been doing this since 1994,
Sure.
going to breakfast at this restaurant. And so have I really gone that far? And the answer is, well, I did go really far graphically, but he brought me right back to the place I started. I
Hmm.
was standing in the pew next to the pew that I went to Good Friday service at for the first time after my conversion,
Sure.
showing my son. And you realize like you ran so far because you were being hunted. You ran so far for him to bring you right back here,
Well,
which
there's
is
that
interesting.
gravitational pull. I mean, and you
Yeah.
go out, you push against the edge, and then you're just pulled
Yeah.
right back into the center again.
Exactly. Like we
Mm-hmm.
talked about last week actually, is that, he brings you in his house, says, we're gonna eat, I'm gonna, pretend that you're not a wild thing. Don't put your feet on the furniture. And then after we're done, I'll let you back out and you can go run and be loose. That's
Mm-hmm.
cool. And that's what we do every Sunday. But big picture, then, that's a microcosm of standing in the cathedral with my 13-year-old and Annie, thinking back to 1995, 94, 95, 95, sitting at pew, going through DTs because I had to get out of there and get high. And I'm in the middle of a Latin Mass on Good Friday,
Mm-hmm.
and they're doing the entire Gospel of
Three
John, the
hours
whole
and all
Passion.
that. Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
in Latin with copious amounts of incense. And fleeing that and come back to all these years later with my child and thinking to myself, like, everything's different. And because now I'm answering his questions about this, his mouth is hanging open. He's agape at just everything. And I said, it was designed to make you feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
But now walking into it, I'm saying to myself, I really appreciate that architectural choice. I really appreciate it now.
And the investment.
Um,
I mean, it's not.
mhm.
You can't really even attach a dollar figure to it anymore because of the age of it, right? I
Well,
mean,
it's
how
God's
old?
foxiness because James J. Hill had it built because his wife didn't want to go to church in the wintertime on the other side of town.
Oh yeah, you told me that story when
Yeah.
when I visited. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like, I want an exact replica of Notre Dame. And the architect's like, okay. And he's like, no, I don't think you understand, son. I want an exact replica, right down to the doors and the knobs on the doors. I want it to be exact. And so he had it built. And it's a monument. It's beautiful. And it's still there. And whatever your feelings are regarding the Latin Mass or the Roman Catholic Church, it's an edifice to the glory of God. And you
Sure.
walk into that cathedral and you are swallowed. You are swallowed by it. Everything again, the paintings are 20 tall.
Well, it's like a TARDIS, right? I mean, it's like you go into another
Yes.
world. Yeah,
Yeah, it is
that's
100%. It's
bigger
a
on the
different time.
inside. Mm-hmm. Time
And I
and
can
world.
appreciate
Yeah.
that now that I'm older. But also simultaneously, you're thinking, well, in the past, when I first walked in here, well, you come here. It was the biggest church that I saw. So I went into it. That was literally, it was just like, well, this is big and this is what churches look like. So I'll go here. And then walking out and saying to myself, I will never set foot in this church again. I would never, ever subject myself to this kind of torture. And then every time, I'm going to take our friend Duncan Cheek there after lunch today, probably. I love it there. It's quiet. It's a place to venerate God
Even if it
and
is
to
a kind of
meditate.
a replica, and in some ways,
Mhm.
it's also it's
That's
replicating
America,
the
baby.
pattern. Well, but
Yeah.
it's replicating the patterns
Mhm.
of things that are
Yes,
transcendent, that have
exactly.
transcended time, that have
Yes,
been repeated.
exactly.
Yeah, it's not
Exactly.
novelty. Yeah.
No. And so, yeah, I think the subtext of this episode that is going to be and is there's actually things from the past that are worth revisiting in the present and right now, especially. I think we should devote a lot more time to the early church and rereading this stuff and refamiliarizing ourselves with the very weird, very alien language and conversations that they were having in the early church. Not just the debates, even though those are important too, to guard against heresy, but to read how they thought and how they saw the world, how they interacted with people that were not Christian and were hostile towards them. Even the Jews were like, yeah, you're not a sect of Judaism. Get out of here. Get away. And then the Christians are like, yeah, you're a heresy. You're a Christian heresy. It's like, these are conversations that we're going to have because we're kind of being forced into those. And also to remember that a church that's not persecuted may not be the church of Christ, because as Christ was persecuted, so too is his church. And I think we've gotten, as we've said numerous times on this show, we've gotten far too comfortable not being persecuted. So that if somebody says,
I mean, we don't have to seek it out. I mean, it'll find us.
Well, no, you don't. But we often then create persecution where there is none because someone was critical of us or sprayed outside of our church. And we're like, we're being persecuted. It's like, no, you're not. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about your city being laid siege to and you being expelled for being Christians. That's persecution.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I know. We don't need to go down that route, but our slavery has taken on a different form, right? And maybe our persecution has too. I mean that.
Yeah, we just updated it.
Well, I mean
new technology.
The key to any kind of slavery, bondage, and persecution is to do it without you even noticing.
Yeah.
Until it's too late, right? Until you're like, wait a minute, what did we lose? Oh, you lost it all a long time ago.
If you see it coming, you'll probably run from it.
Right. Well, that's true too. I mean, I don't know about embracing and like, oh, they're going to stone me. Okay. You know, I mean that.
Yeah, good times.
I'm sure they fought against it. I mean, Stephen did. I mean, and the disciples do. They try to get out of these situations, or not. They just wait in prison until the angel lets them out, and then they still don't go. They're like, wait a minute. The angel just opened the doors for you, and then you're going to preach to the jailer instead? Like, what is wrong with you people? But maybe that ethos will come back just out of this,
it seems to be making its way.
Just out of context, right? We'll just be like, well, there's no point in running because they're just going to put us back in jail again. So we might as well just stay. Right. And preach here in prison.
Exactly.
We talked about that. Yep.
So we'll start with the preface here from Aelfric on the Hexameron by Basil. Then we will dive into a little bit of one of his sermons from Lent on the days of creation. So this is the preface. The treatise, which is styled by Hicks in his Thesaurus, the Hexameron of St. Basil, is by no means a literal translation of the well-known work of that father, but is partly original and partly compiled from that work, and from the commentaries of the Venerable Bede upon Genesis. The author of it, I conclude from internal evidence, was Aelfric, as frequent references are made to his epistles on the Old and New Testament, published originally in 1623 by Lyle. So this author, whose names are so numerous, speaking of Aelfric, and concerning whom so many learned men, Bale, Leland, Usher, Parker, Wharton, Spellman, etc., have held such conflicting opinions, appears to have been of noble descent. Matthew Paris states he was the son of the Earl of Kent, brother of Leofric, also abbot of St. Albans, who, being nominated to the see of Canterbury, requested that his younger brother, Aelfric, celebrated for his learning, should prefer before him. Aelfric, having passed the early part of his life under the tutelage of one of the secular clergy, that is, not a monk, a man but little versed in the Latin language, as we see in the preface to Genesis and Thwaites Duke, was afterwards transferred to the monastery of Abingdon, of which at that time Aethelwold, famous for ejecting the married clergy in Winchester in the reign of Edgar, and as being the translator into Saxon of the monastic rules of St. Benedict, was abbot.
As everybody knows.
As everyone knows. No married clergy on campus. So upon Aethelwold's promotion to the see of Winchester in 963, Aelfric accompanies him, and during his residence in that city appears to have been diligent in studying the Latin language and the works of the fathers of the church. Whilst here he is supposed to have composed his glossary and the Colloquia Peorum, which was afterwards enlarged and re-edited by his namesake, Aelfric Bata, he also translated from the Latin into the Saxon language, at the request of Aethelweard, the ealdorman of Cornwall, most of the historical books of the Old Testament, vis-a-vis the Pentateuch, Joshua, Judges, part of the Book of Kings, Esther, and afterwards to encourage the people to bear up manfully against the invasions of the Danes, the books of Judith and the Maccabees. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The greater part of these works, Maccabees and Esther excepted, are extant in our libraries at the present time. After continuing at Winton many years, Aelfric was next, according to Capgrave, in his life Oswald, Bishop of Worcester. There we go. We had this conversation just the other night. My kids are learning how to pronounce Worcester sauce.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right, Worcestershire. But Worcester. About the year 969, nominated Abbot of St. Albans, and he was, in after years, according to the same authority, raised to the See of Canterbury. Whilst at this place, he composed a liturgy for the service of his abbey, which was used in the days of Leland. Interesting. So then Radulf de Ducetto says a whole bunch of things in Latin that I'm not going to read because we don't need to. But actually it just reiterates what was just read. It's okay. About the year 987, during the reign of Ethelred, Aelfric was sent, as we are informed in his preface to the homilies, by Alphagus, successor of Ethelwold, in the bishopric of Winchester, and at the request of Thane Ethelmar, who is the son of Ethelwald, who is the ealdorman or Earl of Cornwall, for whom he had translated the Pentateuch. I think we forget this, and this is really the really cool thing when you study these early missions is they had to translate everything because the people they were missionaries to, they didn't speak Latin or Greek. They couldn't read Semitic languages, and if the priest didn't.
Yeah, but it is interesting that you've got the, what do we call it? Not the colloquial. No, what's the word where you translate it into the local language? I lost the word.
The vernacular, you mean?
Vernacular, right?
Yeah.
That people point to the Lutheran Reformation and the vernacular, but that's, I mean, and you're probably having the creation of like a common Saxon tongue, right? In the context of translating the scriptures into it, like we had with German, right?
Yep.
And you get this with Italian too when they translate into that kind of. There were different kinds of Italian, and then when there's an Italian translation of the scripture, then it becomes like this is the Italian language.
Right. Yeah, it is when you read Heliond and you read the Gospels translated into Saxon. And you see what the author's doing, and he's getting it from Tatian and his Diatessaron. And then you read the 1383 Wycliffe Bible. You see then, much like with Luther's Bible, you actually see the development of the English language taking place through their interpretation of Greek and Latin text in particular.
Of the scriptures and of the fathers.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Is that you can't, in Western society, and in Eastern society too, basically, you can't escape. See, this is the interesting thing about modernity and the Enlightenment is that they just decided, well, we're just going to build a society without religion and God.
And language without religion and God.
I was going to say, basically, what you're saying then, too, and this goes back to your earlier point about how grammar will determine gender.
Mm-hmm.
You can do that if you want, but you can't reject the Christian faith because your language is built upon early translations of words into the vernacular that then come down to us in the present tense.
Like pick your pronoun, but then you're going to use plural pronouns for a singular person. Like that doesn't. It not only does it not make sense, it's like a denial of reality. Well, and it's true. You have people that are multiple personalities. What do they call that? Two Spirit is one of the 2S, right? Is part of the alphabet list. I guess. Yeah. You
might have 2 if you're lucky, or 1,000.
Yeah. Yeah, well, those are demons, right? Okay.
The reason he points this out in the preface, and I said this before we went on air, is I love the prefaces of these books from the early 20th century because they're little primers. Like, there's so much in the preface of these old books that could just carry you through an entire semester of studies.
Well, I just realized we're only 100 years before Anselm then.
Yes.
So, yeah. So the just the rapid kind of, and the importance of Canterbury then. Because that's where Aelfric and
you keep
Anselm
coming back to it, isn't it? Yeah.
And then you think Canterbury Tales, which is only another 100 years after that, and being a place of pilgrimage, and Dante. Yeah, that's true too. Right,
exactly.
but there's the
Yeah,
connection between England and what becomes Italy, and it's like, whoa, wait, wow,
yeah.
how's there?
It is weird. We were talking about that. Is that we have a tendency to say, well, early churches in the dusty past, and then the Middle Ages happened, and they're so far removed from the early church, and it's like I said, like the Northern Lane Lindisfarne at the like they're overlapping the early fathers. The end point, you're in the
Hmm.
600s now, in the 700s, but you're overlapping the early church now in the early Middle Ages. And of course, someone like Alfred's going to have access to someone like Basil or Gregory, but they're only a couple hundred years separated from each other. 200 years,
Hmm.
400 years actually.
Yeah, right.
But that's not a lot of time, right? Not. It actually they're closer than we are to Luther.
That's true. Yeah, that's a good point.
And so when you're evangelizing the Saxons, for example, who do you go to for your doctrine? Well, this is who you go to. These are who are available. These are the Cappadocians. These are the Nicene fathers. These are the guys who determine doctrine.
Well, and what he
Within that,
does,
it just yeah.
what he's doing here, then in their tongue, right, is that
Hmm?
he's basically creating a Basel reader, if you like, a reader's edition
Yes,
or
that's
something like
exactly what they're doing. Yes.
that. Like
Yeah.
here's the choice selections. It's not going to be
Right.
it's not going to be word for word, and it's not going to be everything, but you know, here's what you need from Basel.
That's a very modern invention that everything has to be quote unquote literal in the term,
Yeah.
like a scientifically literal narrative.
Well,
We have
that's
to
I mean
prove everything.
they think that knowledge is inherent in the
Yes.
construction of the words and not in
Yes.
in the logos behind it, right? Yeah.
This goes back to the thesis for this episode, which is that these guys are weird to us because they don't abide by modern standards of behavior. And yeah, like I said, they're using Tatian's Diatessaron because it's a summary of all four gospels written as one gospel narrative. And they were totally okay with that. That was commonly accepted because they're all about catalogs.
Yeah.
We got to
Well,
catalog
in our
everything.
in our church history, using the one of the synopses of the Passion accounts, that was the most common
Right.
practice for us until
Mhm.
pretty recently. You didn't read each
Yeah.
separate account as if
Right.
like they're opposed to each other. Like a synopsis was perfectly acceptable, and you're like, really?
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
you and
No,
I do
it's
this
fine.
in our teaching every time we meet with our Bible classes.
No, that's true.
I don't
Yeah.
just I read John's gospel and then I'm gone. Like I'm all over the Bible. I don't just stick to John's gospel as my reference point. I'm bringing
Yeah.
all kinds of things to bear. And right now, thanks to you, by the way, it's all your fault.
I
I just
these
go
things.
John, Colossians, Revelation. Just do, 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 do.
Well, if you're going to be in
You know.
cosmology, there's not how else.
I mean, there's
That's where you're going to fall.
exactly.
And throw
It is.
Genesis
It's
in, and you got it.
Colossians,
You got it.
Revelation, Genesis. John, Colossians, Revelation, Exodus. And
Right.
my people
Right.
love it because it sets their hair on fire. But at the same time, you're like, yeah, we're going in a very strange direction, biblically speaking. And I'm not going to just stick right here. I'm going to I'm cataloging because Paul's in Colossians, he's kind of aping what John does over here in John. And Revelation seems to be written by the same guy that wrote this gospel because they have a lot of the same cosmology and language and they're quoting from the same texts.
It is interesting
And
that
so-
Paul has it's out of necessity that he has to respond to Greek cosmology, right?
Yes.
Being a Pharisee, not actually being.
Yes.
I mean, he is a Roman citizen too, so I think he probably had catechesis in both
Right.
schools, but you wouldn't expect that from Paul. Now, maybe John. I guess I don't even know. Why would John be into these
I
things?
don't know because I've been doing this since you brought it up, so about a month. And I don't think it's wrong to say that Colossians is Paul's cliff note to John's gospel.
Yeah. Well, I
I
suggested
think
it's
that whole letter is a summary of the gospel.
because of, and you see, well, that makes sense because at the end of Colossians, he refers to Laodicea because
Yeah.
it's right next door to Colossae. So,
Yeah.
and then you have John writing to
Yeah.
or Jesus, if you like, writing a letter to the
Yeah.
Laodiceans,
Yeah.
So it must be a regional thing. Like if you visit these regions, this is what you're going to be talking about.
Yeah.
Like this is the context of their philosophy or their religious, conversation.
And
guess.
well, to the point then, Paul invents words. We know this. Like he
Yeah.
invents words. When he can't find a word that's satisfactory to explain a doctrine, he just takes other words and puts them together and goes, here's a new word.
Or borrows words too. I mean,
He
that's the way it
borrows
goes.
too. Yeah, but he's giving new meaning to words. He's working dynamically to put a kind of frame.
I do that. I just
model
mispronounce
together.
it, and then people don't know what I'm saying.
There we go. Yeah, that's right. But
What
the
is that
point
word you're
is then
saying?
that evangelists, this is what we do.
Hmm.
We translate the message of Jesus Christ for people. And yeah, it may be the same language. You're speaking the same language the people talking, but you're also then taking the language and you're taking it captive to Christ and saying, this word is inadequate to expressing what I want to tell you about Jesus. So therefore, I'm going to go find a better word. And if I don't find it, I'm going to make one.
Well, that's what we spend all the time in class on. Well, okay, how about this word? Do you think this would be a good word for that? How about that
Right.
word and this word? You
Yeah.
know, and it's like, well, you want it just one word, but sometimes one word won't work. You're like, no,
Yeah.
this is the smell of an animal decaying. It's not. We can say
Yes.
abomination, but no, it's the
Right.
smell of an animal
Well,
decaying.
the animal decaying. Exactly.
Right? It's a very
Yes.
particular kind of thing, and we just can't sum it up with one word. We don't have a word for that. We just have
Exactly.
stinky, or something.
Exactly. Yeah. Which is inadequate at a certain point. So then,
Mm.
whilst at Caen, Aelfric composed a book of 40 homilies, more especially for the instruction of the monks of that religious house, which were sent for approval to Ceric, Archbishop of Canterbury. These homilies, Aelfric says, are not original, but mostly translations from the works of St. Augustine, Jerome, Bede, Gregory, Smaragdus, and Hymo. Interesting. About this time, it is probable our author composed the canons, or an episcopal charge, which he drew up at the request of his neighbor Wulfsinus, Bishop of Sherborne. The doctrine contained in this charge respecting the Eucharist is most strongly opposed to that held at the present time by the Roman Catholic Church, which we see the laws and institutes of England. Pitzius, or rather John Pitts, says that the canons of Aelfric are a translation of the canons of the Nicene Council. There you go. At St. Albans, it is probable that Aelfric composed his grammar, which was mostly taken from the Latin authors Donatus and Priscianus.
So wait a minute. So
Supplement.
should I call
Yeah.
this episode? Is it Saint Basil or is it Aelfric? I can't decide.
Yes, it's both.
It's Aelfric's
Actually, it's
take on
Bede.
Basil.
I mean, to be fair, it's Bede, actually.
Well,
It's
Bede
not even
collected
either
the
one of
Basil sermons, right, for him. Okay.
No, Basil got his information from Bede.
Yeah. What?
I'm sorry, Aelfric
No.
got his information from Bede. Bede comes before Aelfric.
Yeah. And Bede got it from
Aelfric's
Basil.
working through Bede to get his stuff on Basil. Yeah.
So I mean, maybe it's pseudepigrapha. Maybe you're just putting a different person's name on the top. But like, where did all of this come? That's why I was trying to find it in
Yeah.
Basil himself, and I'm like,
Yes.
I'm not finding exactly this anywhere.
No. You got to go
I mean,
to Bede, and then from
Mm.
Bede, you can probably trace it back.
So we'll just say it's Aelfric then. By the way, Basil,
Or
I
Bede.
was going to mention this. The other reason why Basil isn't talked about too much is because he has a huge role in the Eastern Church, and that
Yes.
his liturgy is what they primarily use through most of the
Yes.
Eastern Church, most of the time.
Yeah.
They'll use the liturgy of John Chrysostom sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
or John of Damascus. John of Damascus, yeah, and Chrysostom, yeah, both of those.
The high feast, right?
But the ordinary divine service for them is coming from Basil.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's authentically his. So
Yeah.
all right, so
Yeah.
back
if you wanna
to
talk about-
Aelfric.
If old is the determinant of truth and tradition, then yeah. A supplement to the homilies, a tract dedicated to Sigurd at East Heolen, containing 2 epistles upon the Old and New Testament, which the learned E. Morris supposes was written between the year 987 and 998. It was probably, too, at Ethelmar's request that Aelfric made a digest of Ethelwold's rules of St. Benedict for the monks of Enisham, as that abbey was also founded by his patron Ethelmar. So again, this is all compressed. This is condensed. This is literally taking place between like 600 and 900, 600 and 1000. So things happen. So then in the year 990, according to Simon Dunham, in 994, Aelfric was consecrated Bishop of Wilton, called in later ages the See of Salisbury, upon the succession of Siricius to the archiepiscopal throne. During his continuance in this see, he finished the composition of another book of 40 homilies, which he also sends to Sigeric for correction. Among these was the celebrated Paschal homily, which was first printed in 1566. This is the interesting thing to me, too, is how much later these things were published. for widespread use.
Hmm.
Obviously, following the printing press, but
Well, I think
the
it's like a lot of pastors have. I know I do. I have file cabinets
Mhm.
full of sermon files. You
Yes.
know, not just my sermons, but other sermons.
Mhm.
That I photocopied or notes or, and so you compile those things, and eventually somebody gets a hold of them because they're there in the abbey, right? And you just
Mhm.
like, well, let's put this together as a book for everybody else, because they did all the
Mhm.
legwork, compiling all of this, and putting it all
Mhm.
into files. Mm.
Yeah. So he does all this. A lot of other things happen in between. There's Saxons, there's Normans, things happen. And he dies in 1006, November 16th, according to the Saxon Chronicles, buried in Abingdon, the place at which he had first embraced the fashion of monk, but his remains were afterwards removed to Canterbury during the reign of Canute. And then he has a will, and so on and so forth. So if you want to read more, we'll post a link to this.
Mm-hmm.
But to conclude, then, the text of the Hexameron is taken from a very ancient manuscript, Junius, in the Bodleian, and is collated with Junius of the same, a transcript from Junius from the manuscript in the Hatton collection. So again, Aelfric is taking this from Bede is taking this from others, because that's the way it happened. That's just the way it happened. But we want to read a little bit of a preface. I know it's history, and if you're not interested in early medieval history, well, too bad. But but it just goes to the point to show that there is a chain of custody.
Mm.
Alfred's not just making this stuff up or going from memory. I was in a book once and thought it was pretty cool. No, there's a tradition that's established,
Yeah, I was
and
to say tradition's the right word there. Yeah, I like chain of custody though. That works.
it is. And again, they took this seriously. They weren't half-assing this stuff and saying like, oh, this is interesting, so I'll take this and copy this, but I'll leave. No, they were tedious in their ability to catalog these things. And like I said, they're inventing an entire genre for a group of people that have no familiarity with these things or very little.
Well, and there is no
And
problem having along the way. This is the thing with tradition, is that there is
yes.
some editorial work that's done along the way.
And at that time, it
And
was expected, actually.
yeah, the scientific thing where like we have to preserve everything word for word is
Right.
kind of strange. This
It
happens
is.
with hymnody. We'll drop
Mm-hmm.
stanzas, because
Oh,
they're
yeah.
just either they're not helpful or they just don't
Yeah.
seem to work or the translation's not good or whatever it is. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, well, I'd love to have everything in place, but sometimes it's just not necessary, and it's
Right.
okay to condense it or edit it down. You know.
It was commonly accepted practice. It was an ethic in the early Middle Ages that if I'm translating Gillespie's text that he wrote, let's say 250 years ago,
Yeah.
if I find errors in your text, I'm supposed to correct them. It was expected. Whether
Mm-hmm.
they be grammatical, theological, it didn't matter. You would
Right.
make the correction. You make a
Right.
note, but you would correct it. It was expected.
Or just
And you
omit
knew,
large
or
sections.
you would
Yeah.
admit it. Yeah, you would just like, not throw. That was normal. That was expected. That's how they did.
Mm-hmm.
Which, like you, is offensive to us because we actually think that literature is actually subject to science. It's just silly,
It is.
especially as a translator. It's such a tedious way to translate. So we're going to jump into now his homilies, Aelfric's homilies, based on the Hexameron of Basil on Genesis that he preached for Lent. There we go. This is more toward the end because, well, the first six of creation are phenomenal and amazing and heady. Let's put it that way. They're super heady and weird. They're weird. And I invite you to read them for yourself and think more deeply upon them. And maybe we'll come back to them down the road sometime. But they require a lot of, what's the word? Tilling. You got to till that field. There's a lot there.
Okay.
And it's very strange to us the way that they talked about creation and the things that in the early medieval Genesis A and B, you're like, wait a minute, I thought Genesis 1 started with in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And they're like, not necessarily. There's other things too, like the war in heaven. You're like, wait, what? I'm like, yeah, the war in heaven. You don't know about that? I'm like, no, who's been writing about that? Well, we've been writing about this. We got it from the rabbis. You're like, wait a minute, how come I've never been told about this? I was like, well, because Protestant West. There we go. So let's jump at page 21, number 13. Some persons interpret that this world was ever without any beginning. altogether as it now is, heaven and earth and all creatures. But we in truth say that God himself created them, and there would not have been any creatures if they had not been created. And they were not made through themselves. God fashioned them. Everything hath a beginning, and a first origin by means of God, except that one, the one creator that hath fashioned all things, who hath not any beginning, nor any first origin. He is himself the beginning, and indeed the first origin of all other things, and is ever without an ending. He is the beginning.
Yeah, the distinction between the creature and the creator. It's a, kind of a simple way to say it. But it's actually expressed here, I appreciate this, expressed in a way that even a child could understand.
That's right. The point is that you wouldn't say necessarily in the beginning God created. You would say God made this because everything comes from him.
Mm-hmm. And he's the only thing, or the only one, I guess is what we would say, not thing, the only one without origin, without first origin.
Right. He's the only one that doesn't have a beginning.
Because he is the beginning.
He is the beginning, exactly. Yes. So when you're sitting outside in the grass with your kids and you can say, where did the grass come from? It came from God. Well, where did God come from?
This is the old, the saw with the radical atheists, right? It's like where you keep driving them back to like, well, where did that come from? And where did that come from?
Everything,
like that irreducible, no, that's the wrong direction. Not irreducible complexity, but just the origin of life. And what's it was Richard Dawkins, the famous in an interview.
Aliens.
It's like, it was bacteria on the back of crystals carried by space aliens. And you're like, okay. So why couldn't it be God then?
Right.
It's about as provable an answer as anything.
This is the dilemma of finitude, to be blunt. This is the dilemma.
There you go.
To be finite, to have limits and boundaries means that you have to have a once upon a time.
The finite cannot comprehend the infinite.
Right. Exactly. And this, for us, even as Christians, like I said, in a post-enlightenment world, we've done is actually we've put God over in the corner and then said, well, there's the universe and then God's over there at the edge and we're just doing stuff. Versus, no, he is the beginning and the origin of everything.
And he holds all things together. And it was everything was made for him and through him.
Yeah.
He's the dark matter that's keeping your atoms from flying apart. That's what I said in Bible class.
Well, we talked about this because I went on my crusade right now. People stop killing their dandelions. Like, you do realize that it's God who holds their roots to the ground.
And that's why it's so hard to pull them out. He's trying to prevent you from pulling them.
Yes. Yeah. Huh. The job of the dandelion actually is to unpack dirt to make it prepare it for growing.
Well, you do have the thorns and thistles, though, right? Where it's going to be hard for you to tell
These are sunflowers, but yes.
These are sunflowers. Okay. Mm-hmm. But I mean, you could make the argument by the same logic that the reason why you can't pull thorns and thistles easily is because God doesn't want you to. But how else are you going to eat if you have to till the ground?
Correct.
Right. Okay.
Mm-hmm. No, the thistles are a consequence of you. Dandelions are a consequence of God creating them because he loves you. And he wants you to be happy. This is
highly piety. It's just your piety. It's just your piety. It's speculative, I think.
Is it?
But okay. Is it?
Is it?
Don't spray chemicals on them. Most certainly. That I think we can agree upon. That would be a worldly
solution to an earthly dilemma.
Yes. That's
you're actually supposed to eat them. That's what they're there for. They're for food and medicine. We used to understand these things. This is the point, though, is that once you grasp cosmology, especially via the Logos, all of these conversations go this direction because now you realize, everything is held together in him, by him, for him.
So but it's fair to ask then, what's its purpose? Why did God give it to us? Or why is he continuing? Why is this preserved?
To worship him. According to Basil, it's that everything might worship him.
Ultimately, yeah.
Ultimately, it's all for that
the trees clapping their hands, the oceans.
Yes, exactly. The waves singing and so on. Yeah. They praise their maker. So it was no sudden determination or an inconsiderate counsel. There it is right there. Well, why it's that God's made stuff to worship him. It's not inconsiderate. He didn't think about these things. He's
He's
like, I'm
he's
bored. I need.
he's sensing Darwin coming. It
Yes.
seems like.
It was no sudden determination or an inconsiderate counsel with which the Almighty God created this earth, but it was ever from the beginning in his everlasting design that he would make all this world and all this earth, notice the two there, with his own power, for his own praise, as we now see that all creatures praise their Creator, except those wicked men who overlook him and are unwilling to laud him. These do not pay attention to him, in order that they may perish everlastingly with that old devil. This is the Pentecost episode. Right here. Why were they drunk? Why did they sound drunk to certain people, but were heard in the language according to their own tongue? Because those who are not participating in the feast could not understand what they were saying.
It's always been a laughable moment for me when I teach Pentecost, because it's like I've been around drunk people and living in one of the drunkest states in the Union. Or I think it is the drunkest state in the Union.
Yeah.
All the children have experienced drunk people, and
Correct.
they're like, they don't speak in other languages. We can't understand them, but it's not another language. It's it's not comprehensible. So
It's Babel.
but it sounds like it. That's the
Yeah.
point with Pentecost, right? It sounds as
Right.
if they were drunk to those who are unwilling to hear.
In the same way that Bede and Aelfric are creating the Anglo-Saxon language as it would come to be English, those who don't participate in the feast are actually uncreating language. They're untranslating language. They're emptying it of meaning because they're not participating in the feast. And there it is.
Incredible.
So well did our Redeemer know he fashioned Adam, the first created man, that he would sin through devil's destruction, as indeed he afterwards did. And God also likewise knew in what way he himself should mediate or meditate concerning the recompense, the boot for you, and in what way he might amend it through his holy gift, in order that he might preserve mankind, and also his offspring, who believe on him, and with true love always worship him.
I just made that point to the children, and they
Wait,
still can't get their
Pastor.
head around it.
Yeah.
But
Wait a
wait,
minute,
Pastor.
Are you saying that Jesus knew when he made Adam that he was going to sin through the devil's
Yes.
instruction?
Yes. And
And
we
he
went
also knew that he would give him the boot? Yes. And he also knew how he was going to amend the holy gift and give it back to him? Yes. Well,
Yes.
why would you do that, Lord?
And there's lots of ways you can go about teaching this. What happened?
Sure.
I was demonstrating to them that Good Friday, not only and the institution of the supper, those two events are the center point of all history, not just Bible history, but all history, right?
Right.
And then it's no problem going back and seeing all the trees that are pointing forward to the tree, right?
Yeah. Yep.
There's lots of ways you can do this, but
Yeah.
the really helpful thing is it's like, we're always trying to get back to something that wasn't, isn't anymore, I should say.
Right.
Which is, the pre-Adamic fall, right? Let's see. How can we restore
Everything.
creation to what it was before the fall into sin? But the point was never to go back to that. Not by your own doing anyway, but through Christ's restoration, right? Of all things, the new heavens and new earth. And that was already written into the entire history that was in the mind of God before he even made the first thing. And you're like, so it wasn't there. What they call it sometimes, the divine do-over or something. Like with the flood, that's the big one that people come to.
Yeah.
It's like, oh well, he's going to destroy the earth. No, he's remaking the earth.
Here's how even more poetic. Look back. This is just a reiteration of the book of Genesis. It's the exact same narrative. It's the exact same narrative.
Of course. Well, I say of course.
I know. Everyone else is like, what the hell are you saying? I'm like, again, don't read it like modern. Right? Every chapter has to build on the last chapter. That's how we read the Bible. Every chapter, it's progressive reading it's progressive salvation. Like it went wrong in Genesis, and then God just spends the rest of the time trying to fix his mistake. No. There's patterns. There's a pattern in reality here.
Yeah, and
Every
is
book of the
deeper.
Bible is a repeating of Genesis.
You come down the mountain and you come back up the mountain. I mean, if you want to use that kind of language.
And then down
I mean, the depths of Sheol is the moment of the cross, even though it's the glory of God too, but it's in the midst of the darkness.
That's why we do tropology, because we recognize that no, this is Jesus too, which is why in the Gospels Jesus is always going up on mountains, and then coming back down.
Well, and
There's
it
a
is
pattern
probably
here.
it would probably be an interesting show someday is to look at in the early medieval or the early church, not medieval church, the early church. Why the ordering of the canon, not what books are canon, but rather why did they order them the way they do? Because it's quite intentional, right? I mean, they generally don't disagree about the canon, after the 3rd century, or 4th century at least.
Look at the Jewish ordering of the books, though.
Right. This is my point.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Why did the Christians, especially in the Septuagint, right, in particular, why did they change the book order, and they also give precedent to the minor prophets, and I mean these are very intentional choices, and it's structuring the narrative of all the books, 66 plus. If we would include some others,
depending
in there,
on
maybe.
which side of the street you're standing on.
Yeah, right. And I think it's the same thing in the New Testament, is that you're spinning out from the Gospels, and because you might think that like, well, Jude, it's just there. It's like, it's just we just have to tack it on to the end. The same thing with the Apocalypse, of course. Right. Or maybe not. Maybe there's some intentionality here. Here's something that, if you really want to go deep on this thought, Philemon is the same story that you'll find in Genesis. It's the exact same story. Read Philemon and go, what are you talking about, Pastor Ray? Philemon is the exact same story that you'll read about in Genesis. It's the exact same one. Well, I think that's pretty easy to demonstrate. It's only a page in English. So.
That's what I'm saying. It's just a page, and Genesis is just hundreds of pages.
50 chapters, yeah.
Yeah.
Versus 50 verses.
It's the same story. It's the same. It is.
Okay.
And it's right. Like, talking this way is like waving a red cape in front of a bull for a dogmatic materialist. Like the kind of modern, no, this is the way it is, and it's always been this way, and if it's any different, then you're wrong. It's like, no, actually. Again, patterns don't say it's not true. It says that there's a truth that's there that you're not recognizing. You're not looking at how God is ordering things. Right. You're looking at how men, like you said, just look like a materialist, dogmatic materialist. The Bible is ordered the way it's supposed to be. Stop asking questions. Okay, but it wasn't that way before. So when did that change and why? Well, because that's just the way God wants it. But why? Like, what's the underlying meaning? Like, again, it's like I was explaining to a pastor the other day. Literally, God created every single thing to have meaning. Everything has meaning. Everything. We don't believe that because we've been sold this bill of goods that says that everything is just an accident. We're all just bouncing off of each other, crashing off of each other randomly. Versus like, no, actually, there are patterns. For example,
well,
baptism,
actually,
yes,
as the kids say.
And you're like, no, there's patterns in reality. Why you?
And the only reason I'm thinking,
the
reason I'm thinking about it is that this pattern of reality idea. I had somebody suggest this to me a few years ago, and I just haven't tracked it down. Is that there's an internal logic to the Book of the 12, to the minor prophets.
Right. Yes.
And I don't know exactly what that means. I believed him, but I haven't worked it out. So that even then within even then there's even smaller levels of structure within the canon. Yeah. And that why are these books paired next to each other, or these three together? Right. I mean, you certainly get that with Torah. I think that's pretty straightforward with the books of Moses. Right. But why the change of position? Why the change of position of, say, Esther? Right. Why is that? Or not Esther. Job is one that gets moved. It'd be interesting. Anyway, it's a side project for someday.
So if you thought the first two paragraphs were weird, here's where Basil gets really weird. In every creature that hath a body, there are four things: earth, water, fire, and atmosphere.
Or air.
Fire is hidden in hard stones, and the stones cometh out of the earth. Nevertheless, it sweats, as it were, and from stony cliffs cometh the well springs. Our body is of earth, and it nevertheless often sweats. And he calls out of the fire those that inhabit it, and by the air we all live. Take that, Avatar: The Last Airbender. Ripping off my God.
I was just thinking Fifth Element, but okay.
That too. Well, that too. There you go. Now you know how the fifth element is a pattern of. The man was so regarded that he dared not sin. He would have been blessed if he had not sinned. and would have been ever immortal if he had obeyed his Lord. But if he sinned, he would be unfortunate, and from that time liable to death on account of the framing of the sin. God provoked him not to either side, but let him have his own will. Man was not made with any crookedness, and with no sins did God regard men, nor were there any wickedness in his life, but man had in his power all his own nature, living in happiness without labor. And no creature did at any time do him injury, as long as he obeyed his Creator in righteousness. He was made sin that we might become the righteousness of God. God then brought him into the paradise that we in English call the plain of those free from care. Ooh, that's nice.
I like it.
There was there a pleasant habitation, and they dwelt there, therefore whole in body. And they had, too, in all ways power over themselves and all things, without all those tribulations, which this time injure us, and all of the pleasures that there were within paradise, with the exception of one tree, which was forbidden, in order that they might obey God in that one commandment. I always thought that interesting, that there's one commandment, one. Then there's three, the Noahic, there's three. Then there's 10. And then there's
617.
Yeah, whatever it is. Yeah, numbers of bone in the body plus the blood order.
And now you break 5 felonies before you even wake up.
Right. But it just goes to the point of, okay, there's just one. And you're free. Keep this one. You're all right. 3. There's 3. If you don't worship other gods, you don't eat meat with the blood in it that's been strangled, sacrificed. If you don't commit sexual immorality, you're free. Okay, there's 10. There's 10. If you don't break these 10, you're free. Oh, okay, there's 600. There's over 600. It's like, at what point do you just realize, I don't think we're getting it? What's the bare minimum for earthly life? Don't eat from this tree.
Are you trying to tell me righteousness?
If I ate from the tree, yeah.
Righteousness doesn't come by way of the law? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
I didn't say that. I would never say that.
Okay.
Our church body doesn't hold to that doctrine.
Right. Shoot. I stepped into that one. Oops.
There you did.
Oh, well.
But it is fascinating that, again, at the beginning, God says, listen, there's one minimum requirement for earthly life. Don't eat that. And our response is, okay, hypothetically, if I ate that, what else are the minimums? Did you eat the fruit? Well, she made me do it. I didn't want to do it. She made me do it. So what are the other things? All right, 3. There's 3. Don't do these things. Yeah, no problem, God. Okay, hypothetically, if I broke one or all of the 3, what comes after that? It's like, did you worship another god? Possibly, maybe. Did you eat meat with the blood still in it? I did. Because I sacrificed it to another god. Okay, fine. Those 2. Did you commit sexual immorality? Okay, if we're going to if we're going to get picky now, really? Okay, here's 10. It's like, right. This is why in the book of Acts, the Gentiles are only held to the Noahic. They're not held to the Mosaic law. Like, just these 3. This is what you're responsible for. But in the end, it literally is like, don't eat the fruit. And every day we get up and we immediately eat the fruit.
Well, you could redefine that one command as simply, you shall have no other gods, right?
Yeah, what it comes down to, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, because you want to you're going to look to, it's themselves. That first transgression is like, you will be like God. They want to be God.
Right.
You want to have other gods, then it's going to be me or something made in my image, ultimately.
Right.
Yeah.
But it is interesting, again, that Basil knows that if you have a body, you are actually composed of the 4 things that compose the entire universe. Fire, air, earth, water. These are all within you and outside of you. You're made out of these things, and yet they are also all around you. Again, it's the relationship, is the understanding, like, God didn't just make us and then just drop us and go figure it out. But rather, literally this is the unity and multiplicity thing again. Like, everything functions because of its multiplicity. Like, we are in communion with everything. And so when they eat the fruit, we broke communion with everything. Literally everything is broken because of it. And therefore we have no relationship. For example, fire, as I teach my children, I'm sure others do, you have to respect fire because it will not respect you. And if you don't respect it, it will devour you.
No, you can't command fire to do what you would
Mm,
want it to do.
you're again, even those who do like a clear burn or something like that. Like they'll tell you,
Mm-mm.
like, the slightest shift in the wind, and we're going to lose control of this bad boy. So everything has to be perfect.
We have to have water
And
and
yeah,
be ready to go.
and you have to do all these backups. Same thing with our own bodies. And so we're so out of tune with creation, and we're so out of communion with creation that we're out of communion with ourselves. This is why we seek out solitude. Why we seek out to actually feed and supplement our fracturedness. We actually feed our fragmentation. We actually want it. This is why social media, we can't admit that social media is the greatest evil of our time, because it's destroyed society, destroyed human beings,
Because we're using it for good, right?
because we're using it for good. Exactly. If I don't look at funny memes, I'll lose my mind. And it's
No,
like
no, no, that's not what I mean. We're sharing the gospel through social media.
Yes, we are. Speaking of lunacy, there you go. Perfect example, right? It's to be embodied, but it's
A,
kind of, I mean,
a disembodied word that
mhm,
is embodied in Christ and his giving himself to us
yes,
in his church.
yes.
It,
Well,
it,
just in creation itself, we're denatured. We're
yeah.
so denatured and unwilded that we don't even recognize that this is not nature. This is not where we're supposed to locate ourselves.
Well,
We're not supposed to be in
I'm still
communion.
optimistic that people will be woken up. I guess
Well,
they won't wake
in
themselves
September
up.
in September when the grid goes down, everyone will be forced to actually look at their neighbor.
They're not going to take the grid down because then that'll break the illusion.
It'll go down.
They don't want to break the
Just,
illusion.
just
Others might.
Just
I don't
after
know.
the immigrant riots in June and July, and then the grid goes down from the cyber
Well, I'll
attack
give you an
in
example.
September.
So I couldn't log into my bank. It's one of the four largest banks in the
Yeah.
U.S. I couldn't log into my bank's website for like 6 hours, 8 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody could log in. They were
Mm-hmm.
scrubbing
Yeah.
it from something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Taking data off. Well, because the Russians were going to try to steal $500
Steal our
million
toilet
dollars
paper?
in
Oh, okay.
No, they were going to seize assets. Anyway, U.S.
Yeah.
assets that are in Russia. Anyway, just as retribution for us seizing their assets.
Right.
And anyway, and there was not a single article. There was
Mm-hmm.
nothing on social media. Nobody was saying boo about like I don't have access to my money. I'm like, wait a minute,
Mm-hmm.
how did they do that? It's like one of the largest
Right.
banks in the U.S. and there's not a single story. It's not on CNBC. It's nowhere that no one had
Right.
access to their accounts for hours. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and we're supposed to electronic bank. This is very interesting. How did this
Right.
happen? How can they just scrub it so that none of these things are showing up anywhere,
Mm-hmm.
or did nobody care? Which I can't believe that because obviously I did.
No one's in charge. No one's in control.
No one's in charge. No one's at
It's
the
all
controls.
AI. It's all algorithms. It's all.
Oh, you think so? Well,
Yeah.
I mean that's the fraud detection's AI, so that makes sense. Why
Mhm.
not? Why not the whole thing? Okay.
I deal with the state on a weekly basis, and even the people I talk to in person are like, "Yeah, we don't actually monitor this. This is all the computer that does this."
Okay.
Because this is as an example to move on. My insurance, I dropped out insurance at least once a month. This is no joke. I get a letter from the state once a month saying you're not on our insurance anymore because you didn't do X. I have to call and say call back. They call me back and they're like, "You're fine. Everything's fine." I'm like, "Yeah, but we got the letter." "Well, the computer prints those." I'm like, "But why is the computer printing it?" "Well, we don't know. It just does it." And this is the thing. I was talking with my trustee about this morning. Is there's no one at the wheel. It's because even if we were talking about it in relation, like you go to a car dealership, the people at the car dealership don't know how your car runs. They don't know. No one's in charge. They just plug it into the computer. The computer tells them what's wrong. They replace the part.
Right.
They don't fix it. They just throw it away and put in a new one. That's how it runs. No one's in control at this point. No one's in charge. It's just the computer told me to do this, so I did it. Just go in the back, grab the box, open it, shove the thing in, done. No one's there. It's just numbers on the screen. It's all AI. And we're all okay with it. We're all okay with it because that's where we're at. We're so denatured. Just completely out of it. Yeah. So then he calls out of the fire, right? And then he creates us and he says, "This is it. This is the test." Right? He tempts no man to sin, but he does test us. Again, he leaves 1/10 of the fallen angels on earth to test men. And he says, "Don't eat the tree. If thou tastest of it, thou shalt quickly be liable to death." Death was not created through the Lord. nor did it go upon the tree. It had its existence nevertheless, in order that if man broke through and disobeyed that one little commandment, he might from that time be immediately liable to death. And on the other hand, that he should never die, if he were so blessed as to keep altogether that commandment easy of accomplishment. There was also another tree in the fork, in the division, the middle of paradise, that was called lignum vitae, that is to say, the tree of life. And of it Adam should eat in the end, according to his obedience, and should have the life everlasting and the habitations of heaven together with the holy angels.
So what would you do with this? Because we talked about this before. The word death comes before the reality of it exists. I mean, it exists in the mind of God. I mean, he knows what's going to happen here. But they don't even know what the word means. Do
Luther
they?
says they do. I think in the Genesis lectures he points this out.
Yeah, I think that's where I was going with this. Yeah.
It's not physical death, though. We think, again, that's a materialistic understanding of death. Death is, this relationship is over.
Okay.
As someone who has experienced living death at the breaking of a relationship.
Okay. Yeah.
That you're dead. Again, death isn't scary. It's the experience, it's the pain, it's the suffering of death. That's the scary thing.
And once it's done, it's
quite
like,
easy.
well, okay. Yeah.
You don't care. To be alive and to experience death is, that's an existential wound that never heals again.
And you see this with people. You see the distinction between people who are grieving as someone's leading into death versus after they've died.
They're different people.
It seems kind of callous to say that they're relieved, but once death finally comes, there is a relief.
There is a release.
Or release.
It's not
or
that
relief.
they're not mourning. They are mourning, but they're mourning in freedom now.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. It's participation in the resurrection is Jesus saying, "My burden is light." That's the thing. It's experiencing the death of a relationship, having the person that and this is not even comprehensible to having no God. Like to have God say to your face, "Get out." There's no divorce that can compare to that. As painful as a divorce may be, as painful as, like you said, you wake up in the morning and she's not in the bed next to you anymore because she's up at the cemetery. That's as close to we can come to that kind of pain. Right. So to have God say, if you eat this, our relationship is over. Because again, there's no such life apart from God. God is life. Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." There's no apart from.
But the nature of the relationship changes, I suppose.
Sure, absolutely. Because it's living and active. But to have life itself say to you, life himself say to you, "You have to go now." But I thought the relationship's over. That's death. Right? To not be breathing is in some ways actually a reprieve from death. That's kind of like a reward. You ask some people that suffer, and you're like, how is it that you look forward to death? Because I can finally rest.
Yeah. When everything's a labor now. Yeah.
I think that's part of the problem of the fall that we don't take into consideration is that we view death upside down. We don't even have that right. Death is the absence of Jesus. I know lots of dead people. You do too.
No, I know. Right. Well, that's the answer to 1 Corinthians by growing, getting sick and dying from receiving the sacrament outside of faith.
Well, we proclaim his death until he comes again.
Mm-hmm.
This is what Paul says. Every time we eat this and drink this, we're proclaiming his death until he comes again. It's such a beautiful turn of phrase because he doesn't even bother putting the word resurrection in there. Just until he comes. It's the backspin of death, And
maybe it's because he knew how hard it would be to picture an empty cross or empty tomb and what uselessness that would be.
Right. Well, and it's just a more powerful way of saying proclaim his death until he comes again. You're like, wait, I was dead. Oh, let me tell you.
Yeah.
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 And so, there's the fork. Like he says, there's a division in the middle of paradise. And then there's the tree of life. And
that's how it's usually pictured, right? With a fork in the road, right? Life or death.
Well, no, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil forked. It's on the cosmic picture over there.
Oh, right, right.
Right, is that, you can see that right in the middle, right there.
Kind of,
It's
except you're
forked.
really low internet quality. It's not
Sorry.
helping me.
I'm sorry. It's supposed to come out, and they saying they're coming. It's pending, they said. We just called it. It's pending.
Okay. It's pending.
But the point is that the knowledge of the tree of good and evil is portrayed as being forked, as in being bent, like Adam and Eve are bent over in their shame. And then in the bending down the middle, like it's almost like it's cracked down the middle, you then see into the middle of the garden, you see Jesus in the middle, the tree of life. These are the things we don't even think about when we confess the creed, but here is Basil, one of the Cappadocians, a part of the Nicene tradition, saying like, yeah, this is creedal theology. It's like,
well, maybe that's what's lost with the creed or creeds in general. Is it's like it's pretty simple, right? I believe in God the Father Almighty, Maker of heaven and earth, or Maker of all things visible and invisible.
There
right? And you're like, well, okay. Well, tell me more.
It's
like, well, I can.
Invisible things. What is that?
Come to my sermon series. It'll take us all of Lent, and we'll actually probably keep going into Easter, and it will only be on creation. But Christ through it all. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a good key point you bring up. These are sermons. These were preached, and Aelfric's like, I need to preach these too.
Yeah.
You're like, ooh, and Bede preached them. You're like, wait a minute. There's a tradition of preaching these. These aren't just a commentary. These are sermons. Yes, this is how people used to preach. This is why I love preaching this stuff in my sermons now, because people just look at me and they're just like, what are you saying? I'm like, I'm just quoting the old guys.
And through your own tongue, with your own tongue.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Then was there sorrow, woe to the devil in his accursed mind, that man should deserve the pleasures from which he fell on account of his pride. And he then, with great envy, deceived the men, our first parents, in order that they might both of them eat of the forbidden tree, and then might be liable to death and guilt before their Lord, and that they might then know both good or evil and good. God then drove them out from that habitation, from pleasure to great toils, and they passed their lives from that time in poverty. They could from that time suffer sickness. Lice, gnats of the air bit them, as did likewise the fleas and the other reptiles such as these.
We know what life in England's like here.
plug your ears. And to them dragons and adders were noxious, and the savage wild beasts, all of whom greatly reverenced them before, might hurt their posterity. Their nature also then was altogether liable to temptations, and the knowledge of righteousness was not under their authority, and lustfulness grew them against their will, and other bad customs, of which before man had no knowledge, then contended with them and with their posterity afterward, so that they must with much labor ever thereafter observe the good habits which God created them, if they would have themselves that which they formerly observed without any difficulty. There they moreover labored and lived in toil, sweat, and with difficulties toiled for their food, with much lamentation on account of their carelessness. And to them it was a matter of uneasiness, that they formerly were in all pleasantness, winsomeness that is, and at that time dwelt in care, awaiting, abiding the approach of death, all their posterity in the same case.
Yeah.
That's great. That's so great.
It is. But I think,
as we say,
we must recognize that this was God's doing, right? And this, of course, it's hard to comfort people who are in suffering and distress, or who are laboring, difficult, maybe even just, to grab a breath, right? To say this is the Lord's doing. But that's the point of this conversation from beginning to end, from top to bottom, from the stars all the way down to the hairs on your head, is that this is the Lord's doing. And we praise the Lord even in the midst of great difficulty, right? And, but what we get caught up in is, just the courtroom drama aspect of it, right? Guilt. Yeah. And I did this, and this is my fault. Well, and Jesus actually gets after this, right? Did the tower fall on those people because of their sin, or
no, actually, no.
Why did Herod go in and shoot up all those people, or whatever, however he did it? Swords, probably, not guns. Well, that the glory of God would be proclaimed, that you might likewise repent. And you're like, what? This is all a story about repentance for the forgiveness of sins? Yeah, that's actually the story now.
Yeah, death and resurrection.
Which is also then the story of death and resurrection. Yes, exactly.
Actually, Actually, from before Genesis, it was the story of death and resurrection.
Hmm.
Lamb of God, crucified. Yeah. So let's wrap it up with this last paragraph here. The all-powerful God then commanded his army of angels to keep the gates at the entering into paradise. And he gave this commandment to the angels: take heed that Adam eat not of the tree, that is the tree of life, and he thus live forever. And so it was prohibited to him to enter into paradise from that time. Hurtful would it have been to him that he should thus become eternal, and from all his posterity to be in that misery, that we should all live in this way, in eternity, with all the temptations that happen to us at this time, and with all the difficulties in which we now live. Then God prohibited their entrance to the tree of life for this reason, that we should not live in an everlasting body, as wretched as we now are in this life, which is full of cares. Well hath God, who wishes us well, foreshown that he hath in another way amended our evil, and declared his power and his clemency, mild-heartedness, in that he can bear such great wickedness. And he also hath wished, on account of his benevolence, to redeem us, the miserable, from the everlasting punishments, which thing he alone can do, inasmuch as he is an almighty God.
There's that word that my people hate. They hate it.
Which part? Almighty?
Miserable.
Oh, misery. Yeah, of course.
And you're like, I'm not miserable. You're like, are you not? Pitiably small or inadequate?
Yes, exactly.
Unhappy and uncomfortable, discomforted?
Yes. I prefer you not bring it up anymore. It makes me, it's like, we get it. Yeah, no, but.
And I'm like, no, you're pitiable, meaning, God, you need God's mercy. That's what that means.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, it means I need mercy? Yes, that's what it means.
Yes, exactly.
You're like, oh, so I'm dependent upon God. Yes. Oh, so I am miserable. Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Now you're getting closer. But
it's always a fun word. Yeah, keep going.
Here's the final word to your misery. It is said in the book, in this decree, that there was a sword, like a flame placed at the entrance, with the holy angels that kept the gate, and that the same sword was nevertheless movable, inasmuch as our Redeemer Christ, the Son of God of heaven, in the 6th age of this world, was made born for men of the Virgin Mary, and by his own death he overcame the devil. And he thus redeemed us from his destructive thraldom. And he, that is Christ, arose on the 3rd day, and turned away the sword out of the way for all, in order that we may enter into paradise on high, to the tree of life, which is the beloved Redeemer, who granteth the life everlasting to those that love him, and that declare by their works that they are desirous of him. It is at this time better that we dwell away in happiness for everlasting, than Adam should at that time eat of the tree of life, and thus live in eternity with all his kindred. As we said before, in all the miseries which reign among us, and in all the temptations which here befall us. There it is. Gregory says, Good Friday is the completion of creation. That's why he says it is finished. What's finished? Creation. I finished creation. Because the entire pattern of reality is death and resurrection. So until Good Friday, the 6th day in which he rests from all his work, right? Creation's not finished yet. And so Resurrection Sunday then is the beginning of eternity.
Hence dividing,
day, so to speak. Yeah.
Dividing time up to the cross in 6 ages.
Correct.
So it's another pattern of that 6 days.
Yes. 6 days, 60 days, 6,000 years. 666.
I don't know if I've
ever...
Which is a
positive number, folks.
Yeah. No, and I don't know if I've ever seen described or depicted the bars of hell or that which protects the grave as being a flaming sword. That would be interesting.
Yeah.
But that's the image that he's saying, that it's the flaming sword that prevents one's exit from death into life. And now that's been put out, if you like.
Yeah.
Or broken.
Well, again, in this, it is that the spear that pierces Jesus' side is the sword of the cherubim that guards the opening to paradise. That sword is there to stop us from coming in. Jesus says,
by any other means.
Yeah.
Only by Christ.
And so when Christ says, I'm coming back in as a man, the angel said no, And he goes, take your best shot. And so he gets killed by a sword, by the blade. Because again, if we don't read this so materialistically, a sword is a spear is a knife, it's a blade. It's being pierced by a blade, right? And so even in that context, if you were shot in the side with a gun, it would still count within the broader meaning of the blade.
Yeah.
And
well, that's what Bon Jovi sang. Shot through the heart.
That's right.
Anyway.
And so the reason that paradise is open to us is because Jesus takes the blade, he takes the stroke of the blade for us and is felled by it. And that's why we are allowed to enter in. Because his blood literally soaks into the earth, and then the earth itself is sanctified, made that grail.
Yeah. Well, you're quoting John now. Way to go.
Yep.
Well, the other one is the flames, right? The flames of hell.
Yes.
And
yes. Also,
those
flames,
flames
by the
are...
way, as he notes, we're also composed of fire, as is the earth.
That's an interesting notion, right? But that the
and
flames
it's not
are
the fires
extinguished.
of hell, it's the fires of Gehenna.
Okay. Or the purifying fires,
differentiation.
if you want to go that route,
or
too.
the purifying fire, the smelting
purgatorio.
fire.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah. No, the underworld, Sheol, we talked about this. Hades is the underworld. Death. Death is hell. Hell is death. Gehenna.
That's fine. I can be Greek. You can be Hebrew. It's okay.
That's fine. But again, Gehenna is the place of fire. And the only reason I distinguish these things is because this is actually an atheistic argument that there's no such thing as hell in the Bible. Well, yeah, because the word hell doesn't exist until later. It's H-E-L, by the way. And hell is just adapted from Hades. Hades adapted from Sheol. It's the underworld.
Right. Whereas Gehenna is the
like
place of destruction. That's the trash dump.
It's an actual place. It's a real place.
Yeah.
And,
by the way, also the place where they sacrificed children in the Old Testament.
It was the place where they sacrificed children. Not surprisingly, also on fire. So there you go. Yeah. Everything has meaning. And so, this is the, you can tie this all together with where we started at is there's only one way back in. And as you noted, we're not trying to rebuild paradise. Jesus is saying like, no. Like when I baptize you, that's it. Like it's open now. Like you're in. Like that's it. You got the wedding garments on. The feast is prepared. The doors are open. Come on in. This is why the liturgy is the expression of reality, because that's what you're doing. You're entering into the liturgy. You're entering into it.
The fires of Gehenna are extinguished, but you receive the fire of the Spirit, right? A different fire.
Correct. A different fire that does consume you in order to regenesis you.
Yeah.
The regenesis of your beginning.
Purify, if you want to use that language.
Sure, absolutely. But it's not to reduce you to cinder and ash, but rather to reduce you to the person, the man that God made you to be, which at the resurrection will be, again, tetelestai.
The chaff or the dross, right? Is
You're burning away that which is of the world, if you want to put it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. So that's a good place to end. I have a lunch date.
Yeah.
With our friend, a friend of the show, a friend of 1517.
It's Maundy Friday for you. Maundy Friday.
That's right. I have a Man Day Friday. With our friend Duncan Cheek of blessed, he's not dead, so I can't say blessed memory, but you all, if you've ever been to 1517 or, hung around, you probably know Duncan, our friend and yours, a pastor of pastors, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
He's on hold, and as we know, who's a pastor.
And he has fine tasting coffee. Very fine tasting coffee.
That's true. There we go. So I get to enjoy his company in a little bit. But so we're going to wrap it up there this day. Shorter than usual, so I'll give you guys a reprieve for 1 week. Come back next week. We may be reading Gregory of Nyssa on Exodus. Almost like we're doing something. Semi-organized. Just for a week or two. We promise we'll go back to being completely disjointed. But thanks, 1517. Thanks to all of you for listening. Thanks to everybody on the live stream. Thank you, Pastor Gillespie. We'll talk to you again real soon. Peace. Hey.
Fade out. Fade away. Fade out.
Pause syncing.
Correct.
All right. I'm out of here. There's a traffic accident, so traffic's jacked up.
Okay.